Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 2 of an exciting new series. What if Deku had blood manipulation quirk? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Judas Magnus 1994 on archiveofourown.org. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. When Izuku thought that things were going to SCK for a while, Izuku wasn't taking into account the aftermath of the Tokyo incident. The resolution of that mess ended with a massive amount of property damage, that not all of it was caused by the fire, but by Bakugo's reckless charge into the fight, which caused a lot of property destruction, and some of the civilians that were injured in the incident were victims of some pieces of debris that were fired up at an impressive speed thanks to Bakugo's explosions that he aimed at those Nomus with the clear intention of killing them without paying any attention to anything else that was those creatures. Bakugo's actions during that incident opened a massive can of worms that blew on Endeavor and UA's faces, as not only the fact that Endeavor was the hero in charge of Bakugo meant that part of the responsibility for all that damage and property was now on his hands as he was on charge of him, but his behavior reflected poorly on UA, as the public expected better from a hero student from that prestigious hero school, and his stint during the sports festival was still fresh on the public mind. People who were trying to defend his actions of fighting the Nomus during the incident as a heroic thing had to deal with the arguments that Bakugo not only ignored Endeavor and went to fight the Nomus on his own, but also that he ended up injuring civilians and destroying a lot of property while he fought against the Nomus, showing that he was too brash and self-centered to be a hero at the moment, as he focused only in his own glory to even realize that he was hurting others with his explosions. Because it doesn't matter how good you are at defeating villains if civilians got injured in one way or another by you Quirk, either by a careless mistake or a clear disregard for your surroundings. A lot of people were asking what the hell you was teaching in the hero course for Bakugo to not be able to understand that simple concept, and that put the focus on UA, in particular to Eraserhead, and how he considered that freestyle education that UA boasted so much as what made them the best hero school in the world. Nizu was now forced to see that his constant allowances to Eraserhead to do what he did with all the classes that he was the homeroom teacher were now starting to backfire. Nizu was somewhat skeptical about how that expulsion scare that Eraserhead did every year could shape up those kids, and he in a way ended up considering that when those students in the first year became self-sufficient despite the cruelty of those methods, that said scare was effective enough to let it happen. But Nizu ignored the fact that those black marks that Eraserhead was that eager to saddle those kids did in fact damage those kids' future prospects, not only in heroics, but outside of it. To have that black mark in their records and to be the ones that put those marks was a massive mark of shame that dissuaded both heroes or other possible employers from hiring them, as the fact that the best and most prestigious hero school in the world was the one that put that thing was something that instantaneously made those people think the worst about the even if those kids ended graduation from UA. It appeared that Nizu's belief about graduating from UA, despite that black mark to be considered a sign of growth and maturity, was far away from reality. Maybe that was the explanation for why none of the kids that graduated from UA that had Eraserhead as their homeroom teacher and suffered from his expulsion scare talked with them or accepted to come to UA to collaborate with them when dealing with the hero students of UA when the time for internships or hero work studies came. So now the principal had a new thing to add to the list of issues that had started to appear since the incident with the LOV and the USJ. Izuku's departure from the hero course was the first thing that started a chain of events that undermined UA's reputation, but not even Nizu could deny the fact that all that was happening now was something that could have easily been avoided if Nizu had been more diligent in his work, and his sadistic tendencies didn't blind him to the fact that what Eraserhead did was not only cruel, but went against what it meant to be a teacher, as his expulsion scare only taught the kids that they couldn't rely on them or others to get things going. And now he was in his office, trying to ask Izuku for an answer about why he was in Tokyo and why he was helping the heroes there during the incident. I was there under the request of Ingenium. I recently started to work in his agency as a part-time worker, and it was an exceptional situation, so I decided to accompany the hero and help the medical services and the heroes with healing quirks in the area with his permission to use my quirk in the situation. Izuku said, "What? Did you say that you have a part-time job in a hero agency?" Nizu asked, surprised to hear about this. Yes, Izuku replied, and looked at how Nizu was now thinking about what that meant and other questions that Izuku barely cared to think about. Why I wasn't informed about this? Nizu said, upset about the fact that Izuku had hidden something like this from him. Well, thanks to you a freestyle education, one of the things that I should have told you, the whole part-time work, was something that I could keep to myself because only the students of the hero course are obligated to disclose that kind of information. And I am in the general course, so I didn't have any reason, obligation, or motivation to disclose that information, as is not of your business what I do after school hours as long as I don't commit any crime. Izuku coldly said as he stared at the principal for a couple of seconds before he told Nizu that if he hadn't anything else to do there, then he would return to class. Nizu was forced to let Izuku go, as what Izuku said was true, because in order for Nizu to not be too overworked with responsibilities as a principal, he decided to just bend the rules a little, and that meant that only the students of the hero course would be looked over while the other students' extracurricular activities would be ignored. His mind wondered if that decision of Izuku to work as a part-time worker at a hero agency was part of a ploy of his, or if it was just Izuku trying to prepare himself for a future that had nothing to do with heroism. So, how your internship went? Izuku asked Kinoko. Both were in the cafeteria, eating for the first time after the week in which both were in different places, with Izuku staying in UA and traveling to Hosu to do his part-time job while Kinoko was doing her internship elsewhere. Not bad. I did as you suggested and found out which of those heroes made me an offer that suited my interests as a hero, and had a good time after I chose to spend a week with the Pussycats. They had a whole mountain to train, Kinoko said, remembering the good times that she had there. I can tell. Something tells me that you had the perfect excuse to do some mushroom watching during your free time, Izuku said, happy to hear that she had a happy and productive week, all things considered. I just can't help it. Kinoko smiled a little. Is not a bad thing I meant. Your quirk is related to mushrooms, so having a particular liking for something that is part of your quirk is normal. Quirks do influence a person in more ways than just giving a superpower. They also influence a person's mind, in ways that one could imagine. Izuku said, that makes sense, yeah. Quirks can influence people's minds in order to facilitate their usage. For example, a person with a blood-related quirk could be unbothered by gore and viscera in any way, so they could use their quirks without any emotional or mental hang-ups, or even how people with Izuku started to speak, breaking into a 20-minute speech about quirks and how they not only influence a person's mind and body, but also can influence their habits, making a special mention of those quirks that rely in a way on the consumption of certain things like alcohol or blood could turn those individuals into crazy nutcases if they are denied the consumption of those things for really long periods of time. Whoa, Kinoko said. She wasn't really getting that much about what Izuku was saying, but considering how she was seeing how the principal was silently listening to that speech while looking odd meant that it had to be something impressive. Oh, sorry, I slipped back into that habit that I tried to drop, Izuku admitted. This was the first time after the whole USJ that Izuku got into his muttering storm when he got overly excited about something, and for the first time, nobody told him to shut up to get him to stop. Oh no, it's okay. I may barely understand a lot of what you just said when you started to get so technical, but it's clear that you know a lot about quirks. Kinoko said, well, quirk analysis is a hobby of mine that I've been doing since I was 5 or 6. Well, I can't even remember the exact age, but I can tell you that I filled 4 or 5 notebooks with crayons when I just wrote random ramblings about the quirks of some heroes that I saw on TV alongside crappy drawings of those heroes. Those were good times, Izuku said with a small chuckle. That's impressive, Kinoko said. You were the first person aside from my own mom and dad to say that. The rest of the people weren't interested to hear me, or just belittled me for being annoying. People weren't interested to hear about theories of the inner workings of their quirks. And they weren't as interested to hear a quirkless brat to talk about something that, in their words, had no right to talk about something that was out of his reach as an unevolved freak. Izuku said. He saw how Kinoko looked horrified, and then Izuku realized that he said too much and ruined the mood. Sorry, my childhood wasn't a happy one. Aside from my own parents, everyone else treated me like I wasn't allowed to exist, like my existence was an insult to nature, and were quite willing to make their point across with words. Izuku continued, and then decided to keep quiet for the rest of the meal. He apologized to her for ruining the mood and make the meal awkward, and had the urge to go to Dagobah Beach to do some cleaning to put his mind in order. but he remembered his compromise with Ingenium and then decided to ask Ingenium for a favor as Izuku walked to the Idatan agency. One particular hero was now in the morgue in Tokyo, feeling the weight of the world crushing him when he received a call from the police, who told him that the deceased villain who was burned to a crisp was identified as the son that he believed that had died all those years ago. Dabi, the serial killer who was an arsonist, was in fact Tuya Todoroki, his first son, that son of his who had a fire quirk that was even stronger than his, but was born with his mom's resistance to ice, a result of both his and his wife's quirks not properly mixing up in his kids like it happened with Shoto. To see how not only was he somehow still alive after he disappeared, but to see how he destroyed himself with his quirk, to the point that he died from the backlash of his own flames, was a bitter pill to swallow. The hero was looking at the charred body of his son, who was in a way the prototype of what Shoto was supposed to be. But after Shoto was born and some time passed while he trained Tuya, he realized that Tuya's quirk was too unwielded and refused to continue training him. Still, he failed to understand what was going through Tuya's mind in those moments. Then he disappeared one day, only for him to return as a villain who had killed innocent people and had died in front of him out of the sustained injuries that his own fire caused to him, among other things. Endeavor failed as a parent, but his whole family in a way had been a means to an end in his quest to surpass all might and not his focus, and now his failures had came back to haunt him. If this information came to light, then his career as a hero would be over, because the realization of how much of a bad parent he was to Tuya, to the point that he ended up becoming a serial killer, would reflect poorly on him. It was clear that the HPSC was going to cover this incident and censor that information from the public, as he was too much of a popular figure to be banned from heroics. And with the situation with the LOV, then the kind of firepower that he had at his disposal was still necessary. But that also meant that the HPSC would have leverage against him, and he felt that he had lost it all, as in his quest to surpass, All Might had taken him to a dark path that would made sure to remind him that he wasn't a hero anymore because of his own merits and actions, but because it was the HPSC that would have a say on his heroism if the fact that the Madam President of the HPSC and Hawk's presence in the room with him was taken in consideration. And that was a massive blow to his pride in a way. And in a certain place in Kamino, a relic from the past was happy. The incident in Tokyo was attributed to the LOV, and that gave the League some credibility to the villains that are around Japan, which would allow Tomura to be able to recruit some of them to spread evil and to further his own agenda. Tomura's body and mind were still too green for him to take over, and the doctor was still working on a quirk that could bypass the issues that AFO had with his own quirk. AFO's quirk did allow him to steal and hold multiple quirks, but his body still had limits, and he was at the point where he couldn't keep up stealing quirks as his body was suffering the backlash of holding more than one quirk in his body, a fact that he was still critically injured from his fight with All Might all those years ago, and only was able to function because he had multiple regenerative quirks active all the time that barely keep him alive didn't help him either. He had heard about Izuku's healing quirk, and was partially interested in the possibility of using that to heal himself. But he had already given up on his body and was waiting for Tomura to mature enough for him to take over his body and mind. So he decided to forego to try to get his hands on that quirk. AFO was banking on Tomura's grown as a villain in body and mind, and was willing to wait for that to happen. Also, there was the fact that Izuku's dad, not only an important person in the WHA, but he also is on friendly terms with the #1 heroine in America, and AFO was not willing to gamble at the moment with kidnapping Izuku to steal his quirk, even if his dad barely made any active presence, because he wasn't capable to fight Star and Stripes in his injured condition and was not willing to test his luck there. The last thing he needs was for Hisashi Midoriya to compensate for not being there by asking Star and Stripes to help in the rescue of his son. But as he was thinking about Izuku, he was now thinking about that day in Dr. Garaki's place when he diagnosed Izuku as a quirkless person, when he, in fact, had a quirk. AFO was there and touched that kid in the head, intending to see if Izuku had a quirk to steal, but he was unable to sense a quirk there even if there was one. That made him think about his dear young brother and how he had a quirk as well, but it was so weak that AFO was unable to sense it. This was the second time in his long life that he had missed a quirk because it was too weak for AFO to sense it, and he was now getting nostalgic about the times that his foolish dear brother was alive. AFO went scorched earth on that rebel group that released his brother after Yuichi died in that accident, and he had to wait 20 years to find the last person involved in that group. A simple nurse who became Yuichi's caretaker, who helped him in those first months after being released, as he was too weak to even stand on his own feet. AFO later learned that she had a son that she gave for adoption, and he was the lucky one who escaped his wrath as he already killed that nurse 5 years before he learned that info, and he cooled off a little by that point, and decided to let them undisturbed. That nurse had a blood quirk that could heal people, and AFO decided to stop himself from remembering the past as he had to focus on his task, which was prepping Tamura as his next body and recovering OFA, but that small detail about Izuku and Yuichi's weak quirks that eluded OFA made him think about the past for some reason, as in this world of quirks that could bend the laws of physics with ease. Only 2 times he was unable to sense a quirk on a person, and a small part of him was making him think that maybe there was more than meets the eye with Izuku on the same beach in which Izuku took his first steps to become a hero by taking it upon himself to clear that beach of all that trash. 2 groups of people were in different parts of it, both with similar intent, but for different reasons. On the outskirts of the beach, Izuku Midoriya was Alongus the hero ingenium. Izuku showed the hero the place that he wanted to clean on his own, but was unable to do it, because no matter how much strength and speed he had, he was just one teenager without the resources to speed up the process. This place had seen better days, the hero said. Yeah, rampant pollution had turned what once was an appealing public spot into a junkyard. Some of that trash came from the sea as well. I tried my best to clean this place, but one kid on his own barely managed to clean up to a 35% of this place. And I'm sure that since I started going to UA and stopped having a lot of time to dedicate it to cleaning this place, something just tells me that now I'm back to square one. Izuku said, I see, between studying for the future and the part-time job with your agency, I'm unable to spare as much time for this place as I want. Izuku admitted. Are you trying to be prepared for that exam that I told you? Ingenium asked, being curious. Yeah, it sounds crazy, but since my life had been in the hardcore difficulty since I was a kid, I decided to take one mimetic phrase of the pre-Quirk era as my way of life when dealing with impossible odds. Izuku said, Oh, and what is that phrase? F it, we ball. Izuku said in English. And what does that mean? The hero said, understanding enough of the language to know that part of it was foul words. It means that no matter how strong things are and how depressing things could look, I must go all in and push forward no matter what, because if there is really a chance for things to get better, I need to go all out without any doubt or hesitation and just do it. At least that is how I decided to interpret it. Izuku admitted. Aside from the name, I can get behind with that interpretation. It's heroic in a way. The hero said with a small chuckle. Yeah. As much as heroism in this day and age are dictated by the whims of the HPSC and other parties, I prefer to be a hero on my own terms. That is what helped me to find a middle ground between my frustrations with heroic society and the way how things are with my longing to help people that is too strong in a way to let my darkest emotions to win. I decided to be a hero on my own terms while still playing ball in a way with the hero-obsessed society. Izuku said, Well, you definitely put some thought into it. Ingenium said, thinking if this was the result of his talk with Izuku on that day in which they met in that alleyway. Not really. Maybe my longing to be a hero was not as weak as I believed it to be after I got embittered and just accepted the solution that would allow me to still be spiteful in a way with society while still walking toward heroism. Because to tell the truth, if we never met in that alleyway, and I resolved that emotional quandary without your words, I may have chosen to be a vigilante, but what you said in a way deterred me despite realizing that I had that choice. Izuku said, That reassuring. Ingenium said, realizing in a way that his words that day had dissuaded Izuku from becoming a vigilante in the future. My issue is with UA and the faculty and my heroic classmates treated me, not with heroism. When you told me about that choice of just doing one exam to graduate as a hero without doing the hero course, I realized that I was willing to take other paths to become a hero in a legal way over choosing to take the law on my own hands aside. Me doing illegal things would ruin my dad's life in America in a way, and I am not that selfish to ruin someone's life just because I want to do things my way. Izuku said, That comment caused Ingenium to get curious enough to ask what his dad did that made Izuku think that doing something illegal would ruin his dad's life. My dad is the Japanese representative of the WHA, and that job is almost like the equivalent of an ambassador. Whatever illegal thing I could do would have a negative effect on his life. And even if he had been a voice through the phone since he started to work there when I was 5, he always sent money and presents to us, and I could even call him to ask for counsel. Hell, he was the one who in a way helped me to make this choice and told me that he would support me the best way he could despite his distance. Izuku said, "Whoa, that sounds," Ingenium tried to say, surprised and almost skeptical about what Izuku had said, but Izuku finished that sentence for him. Like that pre-Quirk era meme that starts with, "My uncle works at Nintendo." Izuku said, and the hero nodded at him. To be fair, I thought the same thing, but it's true. I am sure that since you have access to the Hero Network, you could find that information easier than me. But if you don't believe me, just search in the WHA for the name Hisashi Midoriya to confirm it. Izuku said, and the hero decided to pull his smartphone and access the Hero Network. He did look about Hisashi Midoriya, and all his search ended with him, finding that he in fact had ties with the WHA, and his information was confidential enough that only he could see through the Hero Network that Hisashi Midoriya was the Japanese representative of the WHA, because he had the clearance to see that information as he was a hero. I see, but now returning to the topic of the beach. What do you have in mind? Ingenium said, "You see on another side of the beach, in the middle of that junkyard, an emaciated All Might, Sir Nighteye, and a more muscular and healthier Mirio Togata were there." All Might had considered now, after seeing how Izuku became strong enough to pass the entrance exam of UA after trying his best to clean this place, that maybe Mirio could train his muscles there to return to his previous physical form now that they were sure that Mirio was now fully healed up and OFA's power wasn't detrimental to him anymore. Both heroes exercised caution and waited until they were 100% sure that Mirio was healed up for them to try to push Mirio a little harder. The internship week that, if things went as planned, would have been used to have Mirio spar with Gran Torino was instead dedicated to having him in infirmary to keep track of that miraculous recovery, and once they saw that Mirio was fine for real, then they decided to rehabilitate his body, even if for some reason it showed sign of quicker regeneration from the pain caused by physical fatigue, what allowed his muscles to grow stronger at a faster rate. Please be honest with me. Was that kid that helped in the Tokyo incident with his quirk the one that somehow healed Mirio? Sir Nighteye said to All Might, because for as much as his involvement in that incident was covered in the news with his identity hidden, and with him being only mentioned as a worker of the Idon agency, with a quirk that helped in the aftermath, and was given permission to use his quirk by the hero that he worked under, the heroes and the HPSC knew about his involvement, and at the moment, the HPSC wasn't having Izuku under their sight, and you ended learning about Izuku's presence there. Because Bakugo's and Todoroki's presence on the Tokyo incident forced them to pay more attention to those reports, and Izuku's name was there as one civilian with XPLCD permission to help with his quirk. Yes, that green-haired boy with red eyes that Mirio said that he saw in that vision after he passed out in the bathroom had to be him. But how he managed to save Mirio is beyond my knowledge. Midoriya is the only person who actually knows how his quirk works because he is really tight-lipped about it. All Might said, "From what I know, he had a quirk awakening almost 3 months ago, but something tells me that he already figured out how his quirk works. Because someone who can spew accurate information about the inner workings of quirks and how they could influence people has to be able to guess how their quirk works just by using all that information that he has and apply it to himself." Sir Nighteye said, he was near the cafeteria that day that Izuku broke into that rant, and considering that he was getting flashbacks of times that he collaborated with professionals on the quirk analysis field to uncover the quirks of dangerous villains, and how those professionals were giving plausible theories about those villains' quirks by just watching recordings about them, then the hero was more or less sure that Izuku had to be smart enough to figure out his quirk with all that knowledge that Hashoto have about quirks. Hell, for all the hero know, maybe that knowledge about quirks could be part of his quirk. When I meet him for the first time, he had a badly burned notebook that contained info about the quirks of heroes that recently appeared on TV. I took a quick look at it, and what was readable was quite impressive for a child without a proper education in quirk analysis. I never expected that talent of his to make Niza to be genuinely upset at the fact that it was out of his reach now. All Might said, Nizu is a creature that craves knowledge in a way and prides himself on having nurtured some of the smartest people in Japan at the moment. So to see someone that Nizu could have considered as a potential personal student of his to be poised against him because of his own actions could be a bitter pill to swallow. Sir Nighteye said, being aware of how the principal Nizu had that habit of personally tutoring those individuals that he considered academically gifted or had a clear potential that Nizu refused to let it go to waste. And it was known how moody he could get if someone like that refused to be his personal student. Nobody, me included, was able to see if Midoriya had something to offer because he was quirkless as far as people were concerned. That intelligence and talent for quirk analysis were overshadowed by the fact that he lacked a quirk, and now that he had a quirk awakening and people pay attention to what he had, then some of those naysayers are mad because someone with such potential to be a hero doesn't want to be one. And then when I look at Bakugo, I feel that he is the inverse of what Midoriya is. That boy's quirk was flashy, and people considered him a hero in the making. But he was anything but that. His quirk overshadowed his lack of qualifications to be a hero, but that detail only became apparent when we all drove Midoriya away from the hero course, and he outed Bakugo as a school bully. All Might said with some bitterness in his voice, remembering the incident on the first hero class that he imparted and how truly biased he was against Izuku. Maybe he was a diamond in the rough, someone that was waiting for someone to recognize and tap into that potential that existed, but no one was able to see that potential or willing to even see if he had something worth the time, Sir Nighteye said. He was aware that in a way, All Might wanted to choose Izuku to be his successor before he managed to dissuade him from giving OFA to Izuku and to have him give that chance to Mirio instead. And considering how he knows now about the side effects of OFA and how it appears that Izuku's quirk managed to counteract said side effects, even if he himself hadn't in his body, then maybe it was Izuku the one that should have inherited OFA, and it was his own insistence on having things to go his way that almost condemned Mirio to an early grave. That sobering realization did make a number on the hero, and it was Izuku's unexpected intervention in a time in which he was unable to see any future that made the hero realize that his own obsession with predestinated fate wasn't a good thing, and that things could change for better or worse with the actions of one person in the right or wrong moment, no matter how infallible his vision was. It appears that someone is also cleaning up the beach in his own free time, Midoriya. A voice that was coming closer reached both heroes' ears, and that made All Might panic a little. I can see that, but I wonder if said person has some backing behind them to help them with the disposal of trash. Izuku's voice now was reaching them as well. Both heroes were looking at each other, and All Might decided to hide away just in case. All Might knows that Izuku was aware of his injured self thanks to that disastrous first meeting that they had, but no other hero aside from those in you knew about that secret, and he preferred to keep things like that out of public knowledge. So he then watched from a hidden position how Izuku and the hero Ingenium ended face to face with Sir Nighteye and Mirio. Mirio said he had stopped picking trash when he saw how All Might decided to hide away, and then he saw how Izuku appeared. He was the living image of that apparition in that near-death experience hallucination that he had. "Do I know you?" Izuku said he did recognize that boy from that incident in the bathroom because of his face and those eyes of his. His body now looked more muscular and lively than before, so Izuku was able to see that what he did for him helped. But Izuku was going to play coy and won't act like he knew who he was because the only thing that he knew was that he was in danger and that he saved his life. So he had no name to put on that face of his. "Sorry, it's just that I saw someone eerily similar to you that saved my life," Mirio admitted. He was sure that this boy in front of him was the one that saved him, but it appears that the boy wasn't going to admit that. "I see," Izuku said. He just studied those two that were in front of him, and he suspected that All Might was here because the only Japanese man that he had taken as a sidekick in his whole career was here. That didn't mean much, but Izuku would treat every person that worked with All Might in the past as an associate of the hero and would be suspicious of them. "Maybe it's not our business, but what are you two doing here?" "As far as I know, Ingenium operates in Hosu, and Mustafu is far away from your base of operations," Sir Nighteye said. "I'm accompanying Midoriya here because he wanted my help to see about how he could clean up this place faster. He had been trying to clean his place on his own for 1 year, and there is so much that one person can do alone without any resources or help." Ingenium said, "I see. So what do you have in mind? Sir Nighteye asked, trying to establish a conversation with Izuku. To have some help with the logistics of having people to come here to take the trash that would be put in one area to make it easier to collect, because carrying fridges full of scraps of metal to a legal scrapyard so they could deal with it may be the best way to bulk up muscle mass and physical resistance, but it's not effective enough for someone that wants to actually clean this place out, Izuku said. His comment made enough sense to the three heroes. That is actually quite thoughtful. But why do you ask for help to a hero outside of Mustafa with that? Sir Nighteye asked. Because I don't trust any hero in Mustafa to either be competent to help me or willing to listen to me. I've been disappointed by them more times than I want to remember, Izuku bluntly said. That was a dagger straight to the heart of All Might, who was one of those heroes that had disappointed Izuku in the past. That's Mirio tried to say something, but Izuku shook his head. My past is not relevant now. What is relevant is that it appears that you were trying to clean this place as well by the looks of it, Izuku said. Yeah, I've been through a rough patch in the past months because of a debilitating illness, and I wanted to train my body back to peak performance, Mirio said. I see. So that means that you would clean this place if it leave it to you? Izuku said. Those words surprised Ingenium as he knew that Izuku wanted to clean this place, but he decided to watch what Izuku was doing and keep his surprise to himself. Yeah, but why are you asking that? Mirio asked. Because unfortunately, I have so much to do and so little time with my part-time job in the Idden agency and my studies to be able to spare the necessary time to clean this place. So I would appreciate it if someone could hold that particular duty for 2 or 3 months, give or take, Izuku said as he looked at Mirio in the eyes. 2 or 3 months. What is so important that you can say with that amount of certainty that you would be that busy for that PRD of time? Sir Nighteye asked. Sorry, but I won't reveal what I will do, but I would say that is not only something completely legal, but also that allows me to fulfill my dreams in a roundabout way, Izuku said with a small smirk before he looked at the hero, and then he looked at Ingenium, before both decided to part ways, leaving a confused Mirio and Sir Nighteye behind. But All Might felt a small hope after hearing that statement, because if Izuku had said that he was going to do something legal that would allow him to fulfill his dream in a roundabout way, that meant to All Might that Izuku didn't fully give up on heroics. He then rejoined Mirio and Sir Nighteye and said that for the time being, they would focus on Mirio's recovery and would leave Izuku to his devices, as he had an idea about Izuku's plan and would only wait to see if his hunch was correct. There was one lingering question on Sir Nighteye's mind after that unexpected meeting on the beach with the boy that once caught All Might's attention. Said question was simple. Who is Izuku Midoriya? Said question made the hero decide to spend some time each day in order to get to reach that answer. The first thing that he did was to do some background check on the boy, but it was clear that his tenure in his past schools before UA was marred by the discrimination that he faced as a quirkless person, and said discrimination causes reports as a student there weren't unbiased or accurate. Aldera had a poor reputation because of their decision of putting students with flashy quirks on a pedestal while whitewashing their reports to make them more heroic than they were while sabotaging those reports of students that weren't of any use to them. A tactic that even if it worked more times than expected when those students entered other hero schools, in the end, those same students sorted themselves out of the hero course, as their attitude and lack of understanding of what was to be a true hero made a lot of those students to end either quitting because they weren't able or willing to keep up in an environment that didn't cater to their every whim, or they were expelled as their actions and their way to behave were reprehensible enough to make those schools just to cut to the chase and get those kids out of the hero course. So for that, he ended up going to Nizu to see what he gathered about Izuku's past when he investigated Izuku's accusations of Bakugo being a bully, and how the way that he decided to deal with Monoma in the hallway was something that he saw how others did with impunity in Aldera, and that gave him more or less what he needed to know about his background and the particular details that he wanted to learn. Izuku had been discriminated against since he was a kid for his lack of quirk, and that in a way gave a kid the kind of backstory that more than once a villain in the past had used to justify his crimes. But while those people's suffering were middling at best, with only 5 or 6 villains with genuine issues against a society that discriminated against them for undeserved reasons out of 100. Izuku as a child, and even at this point as a teenager, refused to give in and just push forward to be a hero, to the point of bulking up from a scrawny kid that All Might saw that day, into someone who managed to pass the practical part of the entrance exam of you. Out of sheer physical might, as he had no quirk at his name to use and relied on his body to succeed in a task that a lot of kids with powerful quirks failed. The comparison that Izuku's backstory had with some dangerous villains was still on Sir Nighteye's mind. And to read how that whole month after the USJ incident and a quirk awakening made Izuku have a personality shift that made him more hostile and caustic to people gave him some cause for concern. But then the week of the internships came, and Izuku had decided to take a part-time job on a hero agency. That part confused the hero a little, as he was unable to see any link between Izuku and Ingenium at the time that could have explained that choice on Izuku's part. But maybe the answer to why Izuku took that choice lay on Ingenium. All being said, Izuku's background and way of behaving before he started to work with Ingenium as a part-time worker made him think of the background of either a villain in the making at worst, or a vigilante at best, if one considered how things went in real life. But Izuku instead was sticking to heroism in a way, as if what Niza said about his involvement on the Tokyo incident was true. Then it was Izuku the one that offered his help to heal the injured to Ingenium. And as much as Izuku appeared to be intelligent, Sir Nighteye didn't believe that Izuku was just trying to build a positive rep on the hero community, just to turn into a villain ladder as a way to spite hero society. That offer of his to help people during the incident was too genuine for what he had heard from Nizu, and someone that willing to help people wasn't the kind to pull massive long con to turn into villain ladder out of spite. Izuku's true character or his intentions weren't beyond his understanding at the moment, and maybe the only way to get a better insight into the boy would be to talk to him, even if he knew that Izuku acted wary of him in a way, as he rightfully suspected of his partnership with All Might, and that made Izuku more reluctant to talk to him, if what the way that he behaved on the beach was taken into consideration, or to talk to Ingenium. And considering the situation, then he decided to speak with the hero, as he believed that it was the best choice for him to get what he wanted. So he decided to just pick up his phone and then ask Ingenium to set up a meeting to discuss some concerns that he had after that impromptu meeting on the beach the other day. In a couple of months, the exam to graduate as a hero without doing the hero course will happen, and I want to ask if you think that you are ready for it, Midoriya. Izuku was now on a train to Hosu, remembering Ingenium's words about the exam, and he was thinking if he was really prepared to tackle it. He was keeping tabs on his school schedule and how the exams before summer were going to take the 5 previous days before the exam, but considering that he passed the infamous entrance exam of UA for the hero course, then he felt some confidence in his chances. He worked as a part-time worker at the Idon agency, and even if it was just an excuse for him to be in a position to take that exam at Ingenium's recommendation, Izuku had fun and learned a lot from that experience. Those menial tasks that he performed were an informative experience for the future, and he sparred with a lot of Ingenium's sidekicks. And there were a lot of sidekicks working for the hero, which made Izuku more or less prepared to tackle a variety of opponents thanks to the hero's philosophy of gather the people with quirks with a single strong point. And deploy the right people in the right places meant that the Team Idaten was like a jack of all trades in the hero business as they had at minimum a couple of heroes that were capable to perform in certain duties that weren't just heroes that just fought villains, but patrollers, navigators, and all of the other support staff working for them behind the scenes had a place in the Team Idaten to the point that even some sidekicks that were suited for heroic activities on the water had a place there and were respected there. Izuku was surprised by that decision. As for what he saw on TV, a lot of agencies tended to stick to one motif based on the main hero's quirk and focus, like Endeavor being a hero that focuses on taking villains down and only hired people with fire-related quirks as his sidekicks. But he could see that Ingenium's philosophy had his pros. Being able to respond to almost any kind of incident while having an idea about what to do was something that Izuku could get behind, as he felt a massive amount of contempt for heroes who acted like headless chickens unsure about what to do when they were out of their element. That hatred came from that incident the past year in which he saw how 3 heroes decided to stay there and looked at how Bakugo was being choked to death, and their only answer was to wait for a hero with a more suited quirk to appear to save the day. Izuku in those times was a weak kid with no muscle mass or a quirk on his name, but he at least did something with only his backpack and some luck to try to save the day, and even if in the end All Might saved the day and he was reprimanded for getting in the way, at least Izuku was able to take solace in the fact that he tried to do something about the situation instead of giving up at the first sign of trouble. So maybe that was why Izuku agreed with that particular philosophy. The amicable workplace and atmosphere was a plus. that made him confident in his chances, and in the case that he failed, then he would just have to try again at another date. The consequences of failing to pass that exam, aside from losing the money that one had to pay to take that exam, which Izuku decided to pay out of his pocket by using all that money that he earned legitimately by working as a part-time worker in Team Iden, even if Ingenium was willing to pay it for him, was that he'd just have to wait at least 6 months to take the next exam, even if those exams were done every 3 months. So, Izuku could either ace that exam on the first try or fail the first time, study and train even harder for those 6 months that he would have to wait, and then try again with even more experience on his belt. Izuku did not have to stress himself that much, as he had time to prepare, and getting worked up was the best way to sabotage himself for no reason. He just hoped that no hero that had any relation with UA were in that exam, and considering that said exam would be celebrated at Shiketsu High School, then the chances for that to happen were slim at best. He just had to keep calm and focus on what was in front of him, but there was now something that was getting him a little nervous for some reason. He felt like someone was spying on him, and as much as Izuku knew that getting paranoid wasn't the way to go, he knew that it wasn't paranoia when you were right, but he would just keep his wits about him and walk to the agency while paying attention to his surroundings. Sir Nighteye was a man who believed in being punctual to a meeting, even more if the one who called that meeting was him, but the moment he saw that Izuku was getting off the same train that he used to reach Hosu and was walking out of the station, then he decided to just keep some distance in order to observe him from a distance. It was not like he was actively stalking the boy, as they were both going to the same place, and this situation was a coincidence that he was going to take advantage. He was still thinking about the fact that he shared the same family name with the Japanese representative of the WHA, and he was curious enough to know if that meant that Izuku was related to an important figure in the hero world. But then he saw how Izuku entered an alleyway. After he had heard the sound of something metallic falling to the ground with a thud, Sir Nighteye had no choice but to follow him while keeping some distance, and then he saw how Izuku was looking at a blonde girl that was on the ground. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked the girl. He saw how the girl's eyes were yellow, and she looked a little dazzled when she looked at his face for a couple of seconds. "Saito," she said, as he looked at a green-haired doppelganger with red eyes, or the boy who was her first crush. She remembered those moments as his blood went down her throat, and remembered the pure glee and joy that she felt as she allowed herself to follow her Quirk's impulses and drank his blood. "That's not my name, so I guess that I look like one of your acquaintances," Izuku said. There was something off about this girl, but she looked like she needed help, and he was going to help her anyway. "Yeah, you do," the girl said. Izuku offered a hand for her to grab it, so she could get up, and she took it. "Lucky me, I guess," Izuku said. He felt that the girl was hiding something in her uniform by the way she moved, but as much as he wanted to do a search-up on her for weapons, he was still a civilian, and really wanted to keep the amount of illegal things that he could do to a minimum. So the best that he could do was to let things take their course, and just wait for her to try something, and then to be as measured as possible while defending himself from any possible attack. Since Izuku was trying to be a hero, then he was going to follow the laws even if they never really protected him, and considering how the law about self-defense is, the last thing he needs is to give any ammo to you, Abe, or the HPSC if he got in any kind of legal trouble. "You look cute, but you know how you could look even cuter," the girl said. Her mind was being set up now, and she found a new target to satiate her thirst for blood. "I am afraid to ask, but what can make me cuter?" Izuku asked. At this point, he was aware that this girl was going to attack her, as the look in her eyes reminded her too much about how Bakugo got that high and mighty as he heard him with his explosions, and years of seeing that sight on Bakugo's eyes made him recognize what was going to go down on him if someone looked at him with that deranged glare. "If you were covered with blood," the girl said, and pulled a knife in order to stab him. Izuku was able to dodge it thanks to his instincts kicking in, which made his body move in time to avoid a stab wound to the neck. Izuku may possess the quirk factor of super regeneration that would allow him to tank that stab wound, but Izuku was not going to deliberately let himself be stabbed in the neck or something like that, even less when the possibility of her stabbing his neck with her knife could cut one artery in his neck and probably kill him, even if he could survive it thanks to super regeneration and blood control. So he managed to catch the wrist of the hand that held her knife and gently press it with enough force to make her drop it. "Ah!" The girl yelped in surprise and a little bit of pain. This was the first time that someone managed to catch her in the act and was able to disarm her. A small part of her, in a way, expected for this to go as it went with Saito, but it appeared that this green-haired Saito was more capable than it appeared at first glance. I see. So that is how it is, Izuku said in a cryptic way. The moment that he made contact with the girl's wrist with his naked fingers, he decided to use copy to temporarily replicate that girl's quirk factor, and that allowed him to get a read on her power and the cause of the problem in this situation. That girl was driven into a frenzy as she had been denied the consumption of those things for a really long time, to the point that her mind was too broken because her quirk's needs hadn't been satiated in a long time. And by the time she broke and decided to give in to her impulses, her quirk's needs became an intrinsic part of her to the point that she was more. That girl was driven into a frenzy as she had been denied the consumption of those things for a really long time, to the point that her mind was too broken because her quirk's needs hadn't been satiated in a long time. And by the time she broke and decided to give in to her impulses, her quirk's needs became an intrinsic part of her to the point that she was more a living quirk than a person in a way. Izuku was about to try to talk to her, but then a small, stamp-shaped item came out of nowhere and hit the girl in the head, incapacitating her on the spot, and only was still up and not on the ground because Izuku caught her before she could fall to the ground. "Are you okay?" Sir Nighteye said. He had been watching over that scene and decided to step in now. He looked at Izuku's face, and he saw genuine anger for a couple of seconds before Izuku took a deep breath and then decided to address him. "Yes, I am," Izuku said, angered at the fact that the hero attacked and incapacitated her before Izuku could have tried something. But he reined in his anger as the hero did what he believed was right, and as long as the girl was fine, then Izuku could try what he had in mind later. "You sure?" the hero said, not fully convinced about what Izuku said, but considering that Izuku was being civil to him despite the situation, then he was not going to complain much. "Yeah, it's just that I figured out what is the problem with her and wanted to help her, but then you came in and incapacitated her before I could even talk to her," Izuku said, being aware in a way that he had said more than he needed to say, but he was too frustrated to care about that little slip-up. "What?" Sir Nighteye said. He was a little incredulous about what Izuku had said about how he had figured out in an instant about that girl's problem. "Please just call Ingenium and the police of Hosu. The last thing that I'm going to do is to talk about myself in an alleyway, because something tells me that you being here in Hosu is not because you decided to take a stroll in the area for the local cuisine," Izuku said. The hero was surprised about what Izuku had said in a way, and decided to just call Ingenium and the police in Hosu to sort this incident. But before he could even call Ingenium, he heard Izuku muttering something. "I just have no luck at all when I decide to enter an alleyway by the looks of it. I guess that when you said to me that alleyways and you don't mix well, you were being more right than you wanted to be," Ingenium said. He was now in the headquarters of the police in Hosu. Sir Nighteye, Izuku and him were alone in an office to discuss something in private at Izuku's request. "Yeah, but the reason about why I wanted to talk in private is because at this point, I think it is time that I come clean about one detail that I have been keeping to myself since my quirk manifested in the USJ," Izuku said. He looked at Sir Nighteye and saw on the man's face that he was surprised, maybe because the hero wanted to know about him and didn't expect things to go this way. "I see. But what is that you wish to say about your quirk that is important enough to request for this talk to be private?" Ingenium said, surprised about this detail. He remembered how Izuku somehow made the stains of blood that were created by his own blood burst into flames on that day, in which both met for the first time. And he had in a way forgotten that detail, as Izuku had been using his blood to heal others since he started working with him. "My quirk is not a healing quirk that manifests through my blood, but a quirk that manipulates in a way the quirk factors of individuals whose blood enters in contact with my own," Izuku said. "What?" Sir Nighteye said. He was not expecting that answer at all. "Yeah, my quirk allows me to modify the genetic traits of a quirk in multiple ways, like draining them from a person's body to make their quirks useless or rewrite them in a way so their quirks become compatible with their bodies. Kind of what I did for that boy that was in the beach, if that is what you want to know," Izuku said as he looked at Sir Nighteye. That confirmed what All Might said about Izuku being the one that healed Mirio. But from what he was saying, it appeared that Izuku's way of healing people was unconventional. "I see, but how is that possible?" Ingenium asked. "Quirks can be like that, Some can allow people to perform feats that are beyond human understanding, but mine is one of the few that focus in the important half of what makes a quirk powerful. I can't alter any physical trait or mutation that is caused by a quirk, so I am not turning people into mutants by messing with the genetic traits of their quirks or turning people with quirks that make their bodies change into a human again, but I can mess with those genetic traits to influence how their quirks work in a way. But if you are asking about how I can heal people with a quirk that is not a healing one, then I will ask you a question. What do you know about the Nomu that attacked the USJ with the League of Villains? Izuku asked. He saw that while Ingenium barely knew a thing, Sir Nighteye appeared to be more informed as he decided to talk about what he knew. That creature has 2 quirks in his body if what those villains said was true, but after some medical testing was done on it, it was found that his quirks were broken. Its quirk factors were damaged beyond repair, and it had a really low amount of Sir Nighteye started to say, but when he was recounting the part about the Noma's damaged quirk factor, and then he compared the information that Izuku gave about his quirk, then everything started to make sense. And then he got quiet for a couple of seconds before he addressed Izuku again. Your quirk manifestation did that to the Nomu, Sir Nighteye said. More like a quirk awakening, as my quirk was so weak that I was unable to sense it until I was at death's door, but what you said is true. The reason that All Might was able to quickly defeat the Nomu after I attacked it with my blood was because I drained the Nomu of almost all its quirk factors, but the process wasn't as perfect as I expected because I was kind of dying at that time, and it was only the adrenaline rush combined with my quirk powering up that allowed me to survive. Vlad King's quirk factors entering my body through his blood helped me to survive, as blood control allowed me to cheat death a little by hanging on a little longer thanks to that quirk's ability to allow its user to control their own blood and to endure the low level of blood in a body better than a normal person. That explained my survival to that deadly wound in my heart and how I was able to weaponize my blood when I attacked the Nomu and wrecked its quirks from the inside. Izuku said. It appeared that what he said made Sir Nighteye uncomfortable for some reason, but he wanted to know about him, so he shouldn't complain about it. That impressive in a way. But what does that mean? Can you steal quirks or something? Ingenium said. Sir Nighteye was holding his breath after he heard that question, as he knew about AFO and the tough of someone having the power to steal quirks like the man that injured All Might made him a little nervous. But then he saw Izuku shook his head to say no before he decided to reply. No, I can't steal quirks. I can take away or return the genetic traits of a quirk. Imagine an old clock with a complex mechanism as a quirk. The outside of the clock is the physical traits of a quirk, like mutations or body parts needed for a quirk to work, while the complex inner mechanisms on the inside are the genetic ones. My quirk messes with those inner mechanisms, allowing me to sabotage a person's quirks for good, or I can just modify those inner mechanisms a little to make it work better or worse depending on my understanding of that quirk, like for example, reducing the strain that a quirk causes on a person's body. And let me tell you this, Sir Nighteye, that boy was dying because his body was just unable to withstand that massive amount of genetic quirk factor in his body, that strain in his body that was caused because his body tried to contain all that power and made him get old on the inside that fast because the human body sadly is unable to cope with that much power. I was able to fix that problem thanks to the way his quirk was working, but whatever that quirk problem was, it was caused because someone was trying to shove far more pieces of machinery into a clock that was already at full capacity. The explanation may be a little weird, but that explanation helps me to understand quirks better, so you will have to deal with it. Izuku said. That explanation was a little weird, but in a way helped the heroes to understand what Izuku was saying, and Sir Nighteye relaxed somewhat after hearing that Izuku was unable to steal quirks. The whole idea of a blood-themed AFO around still put him on edge, but he's still unable to understand how Izuku managed to heal people if he only was able to alter the quirk factor of a person. But how can you heal a person with your quirk? Ingenium asked. I slip up a tiny fraction of the stored genetic quirk factor that I have of super regeneration on the person that I want to heal, and when that person is healed up, then I take it back. I was able in the past to leave that quirk factor there, as that minuscule quirk factor, because if the body is unable to recognize a genetic quirk factor as part of it, then it was destroyed by the original quirk. But when I healed up that boy, things started to change. Izuku said. That made Sir Nighteye think that Izuku's quirk making contact with OFA had in a way influenced his quirk in the process. While I managed to fix whatever mess that was happening to that boy. A part of his quirk locked on into my presence and tried to jump into my body. That pull of that quirk was too strong, and even if I tried to pull any distance, in the end, I assimilated in a way a part of it even if I didn't want it. Izuku said. Sir Nighteye was unable to understand that. Maybe because the comparison between AFO and Izuku was in his mind, even if he was able to understand that they weren't the same person and had no relation to each other. But to see someone that shared some traits with AFO in a way was telling that he didn't want to assimilate OFA was difficult to believe. But that quirk had something that I'm still trying to figure out how that could be possible. Izuku said, unaware of Sir Nighteye's inner monologue and thoughts. And what is that? Ingenium said. Sir Nighteye at this point decided that might as well let the hero ask questions, because he did ask what he wanted to ask Izuku, and he believed that Izuku would be more willing to answer if Ingenium was the one who talked to him. That quirk genetic factor was related to me, for some reason, and before you ask, I can do that. I tried that with my mom letting me interact with a drop of her blood, and I instantaneously assimilated the quirk factor of her in that drop of blood with no issue, despite the fact that her quirk has nothing to do with blood. And my dad sent to me from America a vial with some of his blood a couple of weeks ago, and I assimilated his quirk factor in his blood out of instinct without any input from me. That makes me think that as long as my blood is in contact with someone with that I share DNA, my quirk would assimilate a fragment of their quirk factors for myself regardless of what I want. Izuku said, and then Sir Nighteye was now wary again. He was now starting to suspect that Izuku had to be a descendant of AFO or something like, and the kid had the misfortune of inheriting a mutation of AFO. The part of being a blood variation of said dreadful quirk confused him, but unless he came clean about OFA and revealed that info, then he would have to investigate that on his own. Sir Nighteye wasn't thinking that Izuku was a villain at this point, even if those things in his background and the suspects about him put him on edge. He needed to at least ask some questions himself to at least gauge Izuku's character better. But why didn't you wanted that? I mean, if your quirk allows you to assimilate quirk factors of others, then why did you pass up the chance to become stronger? Sir Nighteye asked, unsure about how Izuku would take that question. Because two things really. The first one is that the USJ incident and the whole being on the verge of death for more than one reason. It was not enough to be shot in the heart and then feel that agonizing pain as your life fades away. But then add up having your own body tearing up from the inside, because you hit the limit of what you can hold of quirk factors in your body. Even if some of that excessive quirk factor was the one of a self-healing quirk, did convince me to never bit more than I can chew in that regard. And aside of that blonde nuisance of 1B that ended bleeding on my fist a day after my quirk awakened and I was still trying to get a hold on how it works, I am proud of myself for not touching the quirk factor of any person that I healed up in the past. Only the quirk factor of my parents, and the one from that boy were the ones that I assimilated in my quirk. The second one is simpler. It's just that my quirk's baser instincts aren't focused on that. They are focused on the understanding of quirks whose genetic quirk factor enters in contact with my blood. The whole assimilation and manipulation of quirk factors are the result of my quirk having an awakening in a life-or-death situation and evolving to survive. Izuku admitted. Sir Nighteye could try to refute that point, but he heard that kid's 20 minutes dissertation about quirks and how they influence a person's mind, and considering that Izuku was using mundane and simpler words to explain advanced theories about quirk psychology, and got almost everything that was written in those published theories that were considered as true by the community that studies quirks right, despite the fact that a kid like him shouldn't be that knowledgeable on the inner workings of a quirk, even if he had quirk analysis as a hobby. Then maybe that claim about his quirk's natural instincts being focused on the understanding of quirks and quirk factors holds a lot of water. I see, Sir Nighteye said. That was the only thing that he could say at the moment. That is impressive, but what change did that boy's quirk cause on yours? Ingenium said, trying to rail back the conversation after that explanation. He was trying to also absorb that information, but this looked way beyond his understanding. Sorry, I got a little sidetracked. What that quirk did to me was to give me the ability to permanently bestow any kind of quirk factor that I assimilated in a way that means that if I leave a small amount of the quirk factor of super regeneration on a person after that day, then that person would have two quirks in a way as that quirk factor would attach to that person, because their quirks now would consider that fragment of genetic quirk factor that in the past would be eliminated as it didn't belong, but now they are recognized as part of them. And that little detail is why I am that secretive with my quirk. Izuku said. The look on the heroes' faces was one of disbelief, and in Sir Nighteye's mind, the idea of someone who could bestow quirks like that remembered him about how OFA operated. But instead of giving a quirk with massive power, he could give other things, and that was what concerned him. Ingenuum knows already my opinion about the HPSC and how they are too shady. The whole scandal with Lady Nagant is proof that they delve into some dark business. What would you think would happen to me if the information about my quirk ability of bestowing more or less quirks with a simple transfusion of blood? Izuku said, and that pretty much made Sir Nighteye that Izuku was treating his quirk with almost the same amount of caution that All Might had treated the secret of OFA, and how Izuku wanted to keep his power away from falling into the wrong hands. Izuku may have revealed that info to them now, but at least Sir Nighteye was willing to understand why Izuku was that secretive about his quirk. The HPSC would stop to nothing to get you to work with them in one way or another, and certain villains would try to get their hands on you to become strong enough to defeat All Might, Sir Nighteye said. Yes, for that reason, I am keeping a lid on what my quirk can do as best I can, because the only way to keep a secret is to never tell anyone, and I am failing in that regard. I may trust Ingenium enough after the time that I am working with him and all the good things that he had done for me, but you, Sir Nighteye, the only thing that I can trust is that you work with All Might, and that white-haired boy is connected to All Might in a way, Izuku said. Sir Nighteye was looking at how Izuku was staring at him, and then he realized that Izuku knew thanks to All Might's up of that day about his injured form, and that he had a time limit. It was a subtle reminder that Izuku had some form of leverage against All Might, and he could feel that it was a threat of mutually assured destruction if he tried something that could ruin Izuku's life. I understand. It would be for the best that this conversation would be kept under wraps by the looks of it, Sir Nighteye said. He was a little upset about the fact that the kid was using that mistake of All Might as a bargaining chip to keep him quiet, but he was able to understand that people could do drastic things to keep themselves alive, and the best thing that he could do was to de-escalate the situation and to try to make Izuku to reach an understanding with them. If not with UA or All Might, at least with him to prevent the worst-case scenario. Good, because now I want to talk about that girl and her issues, but something tells me that the fact that the officers who took her to the infirmary were referring to her as a villain will limit the amount of information that I can obtain as a civilian, Izuku said. He was looking now at the heroes, and Sir Nighteye was more or less sure that Izuku was telling them in a sublet way that he needed their collaboration in this issue with the girl that had attacked him. Very well, let's see what we can do about it. Sir Nighteye believed that Ingenium would actually help Izuku regardless, but Sir Nighteye decided to help as well. He did want to de-escalate the situation, and it appeared that helping Izuku with something was a good way to endear yourself to him. And it appeared to him that the best way to prevent that worst-case scenario that he was afraid of was to simply earn his trust by helping him and building a positive rapport with him. Maybe then Sir Nighteye would have had an easier time investigating Izuku's ties with AFO. Izuku entered the room with a girl he knew now that was named Himiko Toga and saw that she was slowly recovering consciousness. Sir Nighteye may have lightly thrown one of his stamps on her head, but 5 kilograms is still 5 kilograms, and even a small amount of force while aiming at the head could still cause some damage. The expression of panic on her face was understandable, villain or not. One would be confused in this situation, but Izuku wanted to get her side of the story, even if he more or less figured out what was the problem. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I never asked for the situation, and neither did you, but a hero stepped in and incapacitated you with one blow to the head. So might as well talk about the situation in order to reach the bottom of this, Izuku said. He then gave her a bottle full of red-colored pills. Himiko could smell a faint smell of blood on those pills, and she was confused. Those things are nutritional supplements made of blood for people with quirks that rely on the usage of blood to function, or for people whose quirks force upon them a craving for blood, Izuku said. The look of pure confusion on Himiko's face clued into Izuku that maybe, just maybe, someone had effed this one up by not doing their job properly, and he didn't know if it was the person that counseled her about her quirk that either missed that detail or was that incompetent, or her parents for not looking into means to deal with that craving of hers in a way that didn't involve telling her to just not drink blood. Is that even a thing? That question in a way hurt Izuku. He was able to read the report about Himiko's life and past crimes, and it was clear that she had no luck at all. Her quirk was considered villainous, and aside from that poor counseling that she received that amounted to saying that she wasn't normal and that she should suppress her abnormal traits, to parents that were that eager and quick to reprimand her for her behavior, calling her rotten to the core and labeling her as an inhuman monster. Then Izuku had trouble judging her for turning into villainy when it was clear that those same people that were meant to help her to be normal choose the most stupid and useless way to help her. Yes, in this day and age, considering how quirks are part of our lives, multiple pharmaceutical companies have developed and sell nutritional supplements to help individuals whose quirks have the prerequisite of ingesting some kind of thing to work, like blood or alcohol. And not only they are cheap, but if the quirk counselor that works with you is competent, then not only you would already know what this is, but you would have the right to get those things for free as prescribed medication is a real necessity in your case, because one of the changes that were made in the laws when quirks became that common was that the healthcare of every country should give those kinds of medication for free to those that needed. And the last time I checked, that was still part of the law in this country. Izuku said, since he was going to be part of that world aside from heroism, Izuku decided to check the laws pertaining to health in this country, and he remembered that little tidbit from his findings. 2. Himiko was processing that information. All her life, she had been forced to suppress those urges to the point that she was driven mad because of it. So to hear now that there was an alternative that would have helped her in the long run, that not only appeared could have helped her to keep her hunger in check, but that it was free, was something that was making her question everything in the worst way possible. It's okay. Take your time, Izuku said. He wasn't able to find a way to break this information to her in a way that would have helped her, because Himiko Toga, in a way, went to the deep end the moment that she snapped and drank the blood of one of her classmates when she couldn't help it anymore. So to hear know that all her suffering and inner turmoil had a solution that existed and was only out of her reach because the incompetence of multiple people was something that was going to hurt in way or another. As Izuku was interacting with Himiko, Sir Nighteye was thinking about what Izuku had said before he entered that room. As much as I can agree that some villains are beyond redemption, a hero must try to save them until that cruel reality settles in. And from what I saw on her file, and I know thanks to what my quirk tells me, there is a chance to peacefully put an end to her crimes as long as someone tries to reach her. But the problem is that a lot of heroes are more concerned with stopping villains and doing marketing deals to gain more money over trying to save some villains for themselves. Because at the end of the day, heroism is a prolific business that moves a lot of money, as people's attention span is that low to care about anything that isn't what they have been fed since they were kids. It's the flashy costumes and superpowers that matters to almost everyone in the HPSC to consider a person a hero or not their personality, not their moral compass, nor even the fact if that person understands what it means to be a hero or not. Izuku said to Sir Nighteye, when he asked why he was interested in trying to help that girl even if she was a villain who had killed people. Midoriya does take an issue with poor quirk counseling thanks to what happened to him. He considers that quirk counselors can influence dramatically in the life of a kid, and poor counseling can be a recipe to a disaster. Considering what he had told about the girl, and how not only she is a victim of her quirk desires, but also her issues had an easier solution that no one in her environment bothered to look at, then can agree with his point of view. Ingenium said, both Sir Nighteye and Ingenium were now discussing about Izuku's future after Izuku himself decided to let the hero know his plans for the future. And as much as Sir Nighteye was one of those heroes who believed heroes should only dedicate themselves to heroism and that they shouldn't have a second job, he was able to at least understand Izuku's reasoning and approved in a way his particular choice as his future profession outside of heroics. For Sir Nighteye, it was more respectable for a hero to have a job outside of heroics that was related to heroism or help people than to be a model or an actor. So, he wants to run a private clinic to be a doctor and a quirk counselor. His ability to understand quirks thanks to how his quirk works would allow him to be really good at counseling people about their quirks better than a professional could, but still, why a private clinic? He could work in a hospital if he wanted to have a more stable income, Sir Nighteye said. Midoriya said that if he was his own boss, then he would be able to manage how he could do his work without worrying too much about any schedule, because he took into account the possibility of an emergency situation that could happen that would require him to be a hero first, and working as a private professional does give him the flexibility to be able to choose how and when do things at his own pace based on the situation. Sure, some heroes work as police officers or in hospitals when they aren't acting as heroes, and they can ditch those responsibilities to go back to being a hero if the situation requires it. But Midoriya prefers to be himself, the one who deals with the fallout of his decisions. Ingenium said as he looked at how Izuku was interacting with Himiko, though was looking really upset at the moment. But still, you can agree with me that he is choosing the strong way to be a hero when the easiest way is in front of him. Sir Nighteye heard Ingenium's explanation and could see the logic behind it. Having this knowledge in hand helps Sir Nighteye to at least put down the worst-case scenario about Izuku bidding his time to become a villain. But the hero is still unable to understand why Izuku was taking the strong path to be a hero. He knew that Nizu would literally expel everyone in Class 1A and even fire Eraserhead and other teachers if that secured him the chance to have Izuku return to the hero course. Maybe it was out of pure spite, as Izuku admitted, but there was something more in Izuku's decision to take the strong path to become a hero that just pure spite that he had for you? Maybe. But as he said to me, this was a way to at least find a way to put his conflicted emotions to rest. He had been through a lot way before he entered the hero course, and the events of the USJ, and to see how the world that hated him for being quirkless now wanted to accommodate him because his quirk was heroic and flashy was too much for him to handle in a way. He told me that a lot of people who crossed paths with him on the streets had been calling him nasty things that would have turned someone into a villain out of spite because being called things like a waste of space or that he was a villain by just existing during 10 years would turn even the most virtuous hero into a villain after getting fed up with that kind of mistreatment. And he got that every day in school, with people in his vicinity, and he just refused to give into it and pushed forward regardless of those people that only insulted him and refused to see that he was more than just a quirkless person. Ingenium said, in those months that Izuku had worked with him, he had learned from his past, and the hero was quite shocked and glad that Izuku's heroic spirit was that strong despite all that happened. The hero was aware that it was his words and offer that allowed Izuku to be a hero despite his refusal to be on the hero course in UA. Ingenium still remembered the crawler, and how he was saddened in a way that he was late then to try to give the crawler a chance to do things the legit way, as the crawler was already a vigilante with some reputation when they meet. Things ended going well for the crawler in the end. But Ingenium was glad that he managed to stop Izuku from taking the path of vigilantism way before he came to that idea sooner or later, because from what he knows about Izuku now, Ingenium was able to say with confidence that his longing to help people would have ended winning over his bitterness in those moments. But by then Izuku would have gone head first into vigilantism. I see, so he felt the cruel bite of society's discriminatory stance on those that aren't graced with being born in the right side of society since he was very young, and was undeterred by it. He wanted to be a hero regardless of all of that he endured, Sir Nighteye said, impressed by the way for that level of stubbornness and sheer determination that one person could have to go through something like that and not break. It was clear that Izuku had what it takes to be a hero. Yes, so, for that reason, I have been helping him to get prepared in a way for that exam that I talked about it, the one that would be celebrated in Shiketsu, the one for adults and reformed vigilantes. The one that is done in a select number of hero schools under the watchful eye of the HPSC. Sir Nighteye said, yes, we both know that said exam in a way is a privilege that is given only to those hero schools that are in a way aligned to the HPSC. UA's refusal to let the HPSC have any influence there may have allowed them a level of independence, but that also came with the refusal to allow UA to do things like that. Nizu may believe that said stance against the HPSC gives him some leeway to do what he wants and can use UA reputation as a shield from scrutiny, but the recent actions of the LOV alongside the massive blunder that was Bakugo's actions during the Tokyo incident had put their practices in question, and with the ex-students of Eraserhead speaking really poorly about his teaching methods, or the lack of them, are making a massive dent on that shield, and not even All Might's reputation can keep. You ain't running like that for longer, Ingenium said. He also knows about how things are run in Class 1A thanks to his brother talking about it from time to time, and almost all that Tinya said was that Eraserhead never bothered to do his job and napped almost all the time, and in those times that he was awake, he focuses only in his personal student formation while ignoring the rest. What was Nizu thinking about hiring a man who shows that he is unwilling to do his job as a teacher? Sir Nai said, The hero is quite critical of the approach that Eraserhead has when dealing with his students and only keeps it to himself because he has his hands full with his agency and dealing with OFA's secret. Erasure. Nizu is thinking about the potential to have Eraserhead's quirk at his disposal more than Eraserhead's competence and willingness to be a teacher. That quirk of his is the only value that Nizu sees, and now that people are asking questions about how one student of the hero course of UA, the best hero school in Japan, is unable to understand that what he did was not only reckless but also ended injuring people, then no amount of potential and useful applications of Eraserhead's quirk is going to convince the people about the effectiveness of his teaching methods when those methods consist in not doing anything and to let them figure out things on their own when it is his job as a teacher to teach things. Even if he was their homeroom teacher, he still had a responsibility to help those kids to train to become heroes, and Eraserhead had shown now that he was not willing to do that job unless he liked the kid enough to do his job. And considering how mediocre Shinso Hitoshi was to the eyes of the people, then they even questioned about the effectiveness of Eraserhead as teacher even when he tried. The door from that room opened, and Izuku exited the infirmary. He looked a little upset, but then he looked at the heroes and decided to speak. I talked with her, and as much as I wanted to say anything to her to say that I could help her, I'm still a civilian with no real power to say to her that I can help her, but I am sure that a hero can actually find a way to help her. Just saying. Izuku said, as he was aware that he was only at the moment able to get this far because he had the backing of Ingenium at his side, so he decided to not get her hopes up, but saying that it may be a chance for her. What do you have in mind, Midoriya? Sir Nighteye said. It was clear to him that Izuku was going to take advantage of his contacts with heroes to do heroism over trying to take matters into his own hands, and Sir Nighteye saw there an opportunity to de-escalate tensions between them. Sir Nighteye was banking on the knowledge that Ingenium shared with him about Izuku's character, and the best way to keep Izuku in check was to not screw him over and to be a reasonable person with his demands. Izuku showed that he was quite a passionate person despite his jaded front, and was willing to compromise as long as a proper argument was given to him without writing his opinion off without even bothering to explain why. Well, Izuku started to say. Both heroes were waiting to listen to what Izuku wanted to say about what he had in mind to help that girl. Himiko Toga was still on the bed, as she was handcuffed because she was dangerous. Her talk with Izuku had been more or less a venting session for her, in which Izuku decided to make a daring move from her point of view to show that he actually wanted to help her by just letting her drink a lot of his blood by pricking one of his thumbs with her canines and then letting a massive amount of his blood to pour on her mouth. Needless to say, Himiko got her fill of drinking his blood and felt really warm and fuzzy on the inside. She did ask Izuku if he wasn't afraid that she would try to use her quirk to impersonate him at a later moment in the day to try to escape, and he just told her that his first concern was to help her with her problems, that far too many people had let her down, and that he refused to let her fall even further to the darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. Izuku didn't use those words, but she could sense in a way that those were Izuku's intentions. So after seeing that Izuku abandoned the room after helping her, Himiko felt that there was some hope for her for the first time in a long time. Then two heroes entered the room, and then the one with an armored suit talked to her. Himiko together is something that we wish to discuss with you, if you wish to listen, Ingenium said. He heard Izuku's words, and almost all that he said to them about the girl was based on what he got from her, and from what he sensed about her quirk. What Izuku had in mind was a little out of the ordinary in this day and age, but it was still legal to do, and now they needed to see if she was willing to accept those terms for her to enter in a rehabilitation program for villains. People like Toga are just victims of society's biases in the worst way possible. Her story is the result of the constant failures of the people who should have helped her deal with her issues that then pushed her to the point of no return. She may have killed people to survive, but even then, she deserves the chance to live like a normal person. Jailing her would only solve the problem in the short term, because as long as people don't learn about the consequences of failing people like that when only a little bit of help and humanity was needed to prevent them from getting to this point, then more people like Toga would appear. I refuse to just kick her into jail like she's an empty can into the trash can. A hero should be able to save people like that and to help them to live a normal life, because if not, then heroism has lost its meaning. Izuku's words still resonated in Ingenium's mind. And in a way, he was proud of the fact that Izuku was that committed to his principles to be a hero, even if in a way they went about what it was established. Ingenium knew that Izuku may not be a hero who is on the hero rankings or even makes it to any kind of pool, but it was better to be a hero on your own terms while working on the system and doing things in a roundabout way to get the result that he wanted over being a vigilante. A new day has arrived, and Izuku was thinking about what happened to Himiko Toga and her current situation. Truth be told, there was no easy way out for her as she had killed people even if her circumstances were far more sympathetic than a lot of villains who killed people for other reasons that weren't to keep that mind-breaking hunger that drove her insane. She was going to spend the rest of her life, more or less, under the watch of a hero to fully rehabilitate herself in the eyes of society, that same society that failed her in the worst way possible. Himiko was tired of her life being strong to live. She hated that she wasn't allowed to be normal because she was born broken, and no matter how Izuku told her that she was not the problem, she still believed that she was a monster and a villain freak. Izuku understood that pain very well. He had been told many times that he was a freak of nature and even worse things, and he knew too well that it was too tempting to just give up and accept that he was those insults to dull the pain that those insults caused. Izuku had the will and determination to endure it, but he was able to understand her inner turmoil. At least she now was under the watch of the Team Idadin and was forced to live in the building on the agency. Ingenium did offer her the chance to stay with them, and he promised to try to find ways to help her with her blood hunger if Izuku wasn't around. Yes, Izuku decided to help her as well by letting her drink his blood with no strings attached. Izuku could regenerate his blood thanks to the way that super regeneration worked for him. So he was the only person as far as he knew who could keep up with her quirk demands for blood, and the only one that Himiko was willing to trust to the point that she accepted Ingenium's offer because Izuku's action of giving blood to her won her over, as nobody willingly gave her what she needed without a second thought, and she was moved by that act of selflessness for his part. So that meant that part of his part-time job in Idatan would be dedicated to helping Himiko, even though Izuku was at the moment unable to spare that much time for anything else that wasn't his studies and preparation for the exam to be a hero. Izuku knew that leaving someone that was in dire need of help hanging like that was not only unheroic, but was against his principles. So for the moment, he was going to return to the routine in UA to be the quiet kid of Class 1C while chatting with Kinoko during lunch hour about any topic that she wanted to discuss with him. It appears that the students of the Hero course are going to face the teachers in a 2-versus-1 fight for the final exam, Kinoko said. I hope that the teachers either pull their punches or that said exam had other parameters to succeed, because no offense, but all you people of the first year on heroics are still too green to win against one of the heroes who work as teachers here, even if they are playing around with you people. Izuku said. I know, but can I ask you something? Sure, go ahead. Izuku said to Kinoko's question. Is there something that you could do to help us? Kinoko said. Izuku was a little surprised about that request, but he decided to indulge her. Sure, but what you do have in mind? Izuku asked. Do you think that you could use that knowledge of quirks that you have to help me and my classmates to pass? Kinoko asked. I see. But do you have any specifics? I mean, do you want me to try to find any extra application of your quirk, or do you want me to try to give you a battle plan against any possible teacher that you could face in the exam? Izuku asked. Yes, Kinoko said. Izuku saw that she barely thought about this, but considering the situation, then Izuku was far more forgiving about her not being that sure about what kind of help she wanted. Fine, I see what I can do, but it's going to cost you a little something. Izuku said. He saw that Kinoko was surprised about what Izuku said, but he decided to clear the air with her before she could get the wrong impression. Relax, that cost is a symbolic thing. You just have to bring me an empty notebook for me to write the information that you want. At worst, you can just spend up to 300 yen for a cheap one at a convenience store or something like that. Consider that a way to show your commitment to getting my help, because even if I believe that things like quirk counseling should be given with little to no question, I just want to know that the person who asks for my help is not wasting my time. So by giving me an empty notebook, I can see that you want to keep what I say to you written on that notebook to read at a later date. Izuku said. Kinoko then relaxed a little. Oh, that makes sense, Kinoko said. So, just bring me an empty notebook, and I will see what I can do during the lunch hour. I have to study for my own exams, so you will have to understand that while I'm offering you my help, I'm still bound by my responsibilities as a student, and I'm putting the few free time that I have at the moment to help. Izuku said. Yeah, you have a part-time job, Kinoko remembered, and she realized that Izuku was quite busy outside of school, while she and the others used the time out of school to rest from their class days as hero students. Don't worry, I promise that I can get what you need before the end of the lunch PRD. But if your classmates want to take this offer, I just ask for you people to come in a reasonable group of people for me to work on those notebooks while being able to eat. Izuku said. Kinoko nodded at his words, and then they parted ways after they had eaten. Izuku knew that his workload at the moment was getting bigger and bigger, and that Izuku could have refused to help Kinoko and those who wanted his help. But Izuku decided to treat kindly to those who treated him with kindness. And Kinoko was the first person who showed to him some genuine kindness in while he was still being a little moody after the debacle of the USJ incident. So he was going to put the effort anyway and would go plus ultra even if he was not that eager to hear that. Motto again for a while. A day after class, Izuku saw Sir Nighteye near the entrance, probably waiting for his apprentice or All Might. Izuku was half a mind to just mind his own business and go back home to change into more civilian clothes to go to Hosa to work in Idaten. But then, Sir Nighteye saw him, and by the looks of it, the hero had some bussiness with him. Midoriya, I hope school is treating you well, the hero said. Izuku took a deep breath, and then replied to the man as polite as posable. Well, I wrote a couple of notebooks full of information for some students of Class 1B who want to help with their upcoming exam. One part of the exam for the students of the hero course is going to be a 2 versus 1 fight against a teacher, and some of the students of Class 1B wanted to see if I could use my skills with quirk analysis to give him either a strategy against the teachers or tips to improve their quirks. Izuku said. Sir Nighteye knew now about Izuku Quirk's true potential, so he was almost curious to see what Izuku had written on those notebooks, but he had other pressing matters now. I don't need my quirk to see that your knowledge about quirks could actually give those kids a fighting chance against the teachers if they apply that knowledge properly, but can I borrow a little of your time? There is something that I need to talk about, and even if I know that the topic in a way doesn't concern you that much, I believe that it is for the best that you get to know about that topic. Sir Nighteye said. Izuku knew that he was talking about his family, or to be more specific, who was the first generation of quirk wielders in his family, and Izuku was not really interested that much because of what his mom said to him. In the side of her family, the first quirk user was an orphan boy in Japan with a healing quirk that became a doctor. Fine, you know that I don't care that much about the topic, but if you are so insistent, then I will go with you, but at least let me call Ingenium first to warn him that I will get there a little late. You may believe that being a part-time worker on Idaten is just an excuse for me to take that exam, but I take my responsibilities as a part-time worker seriously. Izuku said. He picked up his phone and then called the hero. Fair enough, but don't worry. I won't take too much of your time. Sir Nighteye said. Izuku then accompanied the hero to the nearest train station in order to put the issue of his ancestors to rest. Mirio Togata was now more or less able to deal with OFA properly, without the threat to his life that OFA was before his quirk manifested, but there was still one small issue. I can't believe it, All Might said. Both Mirio and the hero were in Sir Nighteye's agency in order to discuss what the vestiges of OFA had revealed to Mirio. In particular, what the third vestige revealed about the fact that there was a living relative of the first wielder of OFA and AFO. Bruce said that Yuichi's romantic fling with the nurse who took care of him ended materializing in the form of one night of passion before the day that he was killed by his own brother, and that said night ended with her getting PRGNNT with his kid. Mirio repeated to All Might. So Mirai's hunch ended being right in the way, All Might said. All Might had a knee-jerk reaction to the idea of Izuku being a direct descendant of his nemesis. But it appeared that God has a sense of humor, and made it so Izuku was in a way a direct descendant of the man that caused him some crippling injuries for the rest of his life. But only because AFO was the older twin of the man who was Izuku's ancestor. That meant that Izuku was in one way or another tied to the legacy of OFA and AFO, because he was a living relative as nemesis, and Izuku's existence was possible because AFO gave Yuichi that stockpiling quirk that ended up creating OFA. Bruce was the only one who knew about that nurse's PRGNCY, and Bruce made sure that Akari Hiroka was out of harm's way and keep that secret to the tomb, hoping that by never revealing that detail, then maybe AFO would never get his hands on her, and the baby, Mirio said. When he shared that detail with his mentor and All Might, they pulled up all the resources that they had at their disposal and found that Akari Hiroka died in a freak accident, and that she was a woman who never married and who gave her only son for adoption the moment that he was born in a hospital in Okinawa. Then they found out information about that boy, and he was adopted by a couple from the area whose family name was Midori. A couple from Okinawa with that family name adopted that baby, and that family name persisted, with Izuku Midoriya being the latest and youngest descendant from Yuichi aside from his mom. All Might said, to think that AFO ended up being so close to getting his hands on part of his dear brother's legacy, but he managed to ruin it by killing the only person that knew about it was funny in a way. Yuichi felt that connection the moment that Midoriya used his quirk to save my life by manipulating OFA. Both Izuku's quirk and OFA were almost in sync, but Izuku refused that connection as much as he could, with only one fragment of OFA sticking with Izuku, a fragment that allowed Izuku to wield the same power that Yuichi had before OFA was created when AFO forced a quirk on him. Quirk bestowal. Mirio said, the power to give a quirker at least half of it for what Midoriya said to Mirai. That kind of power could bring a lot of good or a lot of evil to the world if it falls in the wrong hands. All Might said as he thought about the implications of Izuku's quirk true abilities that only he knew thanks to Mirai's interaction with Izuku and the deal that both Izuku and Mirai reached. Said deal, in the end, was a pact of non-aggression in which both Mirai and he would leave Izuku to his own devices as he wasn't doing anything dangerous and wasn't planning to do it anyway. And Izuku would keep the truth about All Might's time limit for himself and never disclose it. Mirai told him that as long as he kept Izuku's intentions and quirk under wraps from Yua, then Izuku wasn't that miffed if he shared the truth with All Might, if that meant that All Might would stop pestering him. All Might wasn't sure if that meant that Izuku was willing to talk with him or that even Izuku would be willing to listen to him. But as long as All Might knew that Izuku wasn't going to commit any sort of crime and in fact was still trying to become a hero, then he would have to take solace in that fact. All Might decided after some deliberation with Sir Nighteye that it would be only fair to Izuku to reveal the truth about OFA and AFO to him. Not only because the hero believed that it was the right thing to do after learning that Izuku had a secret as important as his injury was, but because warning Izuku about AFO's existence and the potential danger that Izuku could face just because his ties with him was a sensible choice. The vestige of Yuichi gave a greater insight into AFO's mindset and obsession, and considering that AFO was quite possessive of Yuichi when he was alive and was determined to do anything to recover the last vestige of Yuichi existence out of that possessive streak of his, then All Might didn't want to know what would happen to Izuku and his mom if the villain, that at this point All Might was sure that he was alive, caught wind of that information about Yuichi's descendants and would try to target them to have them under his thumb as he did with Yuichi before the second and third wielders of OFA rescued him. Maybe All Might was a little paranoid, and for all he knew, AFO couldn't care less about Yuichi's descendants. But after dealing with AFO for so long, All Might prefer to be safe than sorry. So, when the door of Sir Nighteye's office opened from the outside, and All Might saw how Sir Nighteye and Izuku entered the room, then All Might mentally prepared himself to have this talk with the boy that he had almost driven away from heroics once, hoping that this time his words didn't sour Izuku's mood more than he had been since that day after the events of the USJ. The train ride to Hosu was heavier for Izuku now that he knew the truth about All Might's quirk and who his ancestors were. Being related to one of the most vile villains in the world while also being related to one of the most selfless heroes in the world, who was not only the original wielder of OFA, but also the man who was Izuku's ancestor, gave him a lot to think about. It was funny to think that he was part of a long-time feud between brothers that spanned generations because he was related to the one sibling that cheated death in a way thanks to the way his quirk worked. OFA and AFO, both quirks whose power was related to the concept of transferring quirks from one person to another, were part of his quirk in a way, but his quirk was a blend of both quirks in a way, while having the blood theme that came from that nurse. That at least made it understandable why those tests failed when that doctor tried to see if he had a fire-breathing quirk or a psychic quirk. The characteristics of his quirk came straight from the first-generation quirk users of his bloodline. The revelation of that whole secret and the secret war that his whole family were part of now was something that Izuku had still trouble digesting in a way, But he decided to do something that even if put him in a weaker position with All Might or Sir Nighteye. Izuku felt that it was a preferable alternative than to have a villainous great-great-great-uncle or something like that coming into his life to ruin it because he is part of his family. He healed All Might in a way and tried his best to prevent him from losing that ember of power that still remained in him. But that fading power was the result of OFA residual genetic quirk factor that was self-destroying itself, because now that the quirk was out of his body, then all that power had nothing to latch on, so it destroyed itself. Izuku decided to have a sense of humor and irony when he decided to help All Might and jury-rig those fading quirk factors with the genetic quirk factors of that All Might killer that he added to the mix to create a weaker variation of OFA that only had super regeneration and shock absorption that while allowed All Might to still conserve that remaining power on his body in a permanent manner. But All Might now had only less than 2 hours a day to use that power, but he at least now had those 2 quirks to work around while he ran out of time to use OFA's power. He did get something out of that deal, and that was that All Might would leave him be while they were in UA and would have his back if the worst-case scenario ended happening. Izuku may see that his connection to a man that he only learned about his experience now meant nothing in the grand scheme of things, but the hero-obsessed society is too quick to judge people if they are related to a villain in any shape or form. And he had no faith at all that people would look at his case in a favorable light. Consider how this kind of situation tended to resolve in Japan. In other countries, one could actually make a case about how just because one was related to a villain that didn't mean that they were a villain in the making, but Japan was Japan, and the culture of shaming and stigmatizing people for being related to criminals or villains was still going strong. Himiko Toga's family situation was a clear example of that culture in full effect. And even if in that particular case, her parents were deserving of that shame and stigma for their poor parenting skills. The last thing Izuku wanted was for his mother to endure that abuse because she and Izuku were related to a supervillain who should have died a long time ago. Izuku's mother already suffered public stigmatization and shame because he was supposedly quirkless, and Izuku knew that if people wanted to do that to his mother again for that stupid reason, then Izuku knew that he would become a villain and would make those people regret being born. Izuku's heart was heroic, and his resolution to be a hero was powerful. But Izuku knew that the only thing that he cared about more than heroism was his family. And considering that the only time that he got violent in Aldera was when one bully that wasn't Bakugo decided to insult him and say that his mom should have killed herself for giving BRTH to a quirkless freak, and those words made Izuku's sight to go red until the scream of pain of the bully snapped him from his rage-induced trance because Izuku shattered the bully's jaw with his fist to the point that he knocked all his teeth out until a teacher stopped him. That made not only Izuku realize that his suppressed anger leaked out only when someone insulted his mom, but the people of Aldera found out that going for his family was something to avoid because the sight of the kid that they bullied and belittled without any fear or retaliation, snapping into a psychotic fury, was such a disturbing sight that even Izuku himself believed that was under the effects of a mental quirk. And even if that was the only time that he got away with something there, because even those discriminating teachers believed that he had been a victim of a mental quirk, the Popelder decided to not insult his parents from now on. That happened when Izuku was still a quirkless kid, and he wailed at someone older and stronger than him like it was nothing. So now that he was more physically imposing and had a powerful quirk, then Izuku knew that the chances of him leveling Mustafu into the ground in a fit of rage were really high if the whole society tried to hurt his mom. And he had to thank that kind of reaction to AFO if what Mirio shared with him about AFO's mentality and how he dealt with those that messed up with things that were his property. Maybe Izuku should find a therapist to get those emotional outbursts under control, or to try to assimilate some quirk factors of a mental quirk that could help him not fly out of the handle. Himiko Toga's life was now going up for the first time in her life. Sure, she was more or less under the watch of a hero because of her crimes, and it would take years before she could be living on her own without a hero keeping tabs on her, but she had access to those nutritional supplements that helped her to keep that urge to drink blood in check, and Izuku gave her some of his blood almost every day. So she had little to complain about the situation. I'm still not getting it, aside from the fact that she was more or less forced to finish her education, that same education that she abandoned when she lost control of her quirk, and then she started to live on the streets all those years ago. She may have learned to survive on the streets after abandoning school, but now that she was back on track to make a normal life in a way, then she was forced to pick back those books. "Let me see," Izuku said. He was now helping Himiko to understand some topics on those books that she was reading in his spare time after both had finished with their 4 hours of part-time work. Ingenium was the hero that was overseeing her rehabilitation, and he decided that it would help her to do some work while she was under his watch, and that made him decide that Himiko would work as a part-time worker in his agency. Some heroes with fewer morals and longing to actually rehabilitate people would attempt to force Himiko to work for them as a part-time worker for more time than was legal and for free. But Ingenium respected the law, and for the time being, since Himiko was still below the 18-year-old mark, then she only worked 4 hours every day. Himiko's first days were rougher as she had no idea about what to do. But Izuku joined her during the shifts that he was available and helped her to get an insight into what she was supposed to do. Her special condition limited the number of things that she could do, as she wasn't allowed to abandon the agency unless a hero accompanied her. But she had some genuine fun helping in the reception area of the agency and doing some menial but important tasks that gave her a sense of purpose. The fact that even despite being under Ingenium's watch as a villain to be rehabilitated didn't stop Ingenium from paying her for the work that she did also helped her to be more at ease in her actual situation. Himiko was now in an environment that allowed her to grow and be herself in a way as people that were willing to accommodate her quirk needs and weren't treating her like a monster, but as a person with her own needs and troubles. She was almost surprised over the fact that she wasn't regressing to her blood-starved, maddened self-mentality of associating blood with love, but it was clear to her that if only her parents bothered themselves with looking for a way to help her, that not only was easy to find but was affordable. Overjudging her as a lost cause and tried to just beat into her head that she was a monster and she needed to act like a human. Then maybe that mask of herself that she was forced to wear in public could have to be almost her real self, because as long as her needs were covered, then she was able to keep her inclination and longing for blood under control aside from her natural fascination for blood. But at last, Himiko only found out that understanding and willingness to accommodate her needs on the hands of a boy who bore a harder burden in life than her. Izuku Midoriya was someone who had suffered more than her, and that didn't stop Izuku from trying to be a better person. He didn't judge her for wanting to have an easier life and to live as a normal girl, nor blamed her for her thirst for blood. He just told her that she had the right to want things to be easier for her, and that it was a hero's job to live a harder life, so people like her could live an easier and normal life. Himiko's life experiences made her more cynic about heroes, and even she believed that Izuku was just preaching to her when they talked in that infirmary room. But it was the action of him willingly sharing his blood with her in a way that she considered NTMT that won her over. Himiko knew that maybe it was a little cheap for Izuku to give his blood to her, because he could easily afford to give his blood, but Izuku had no reason to do it, and he gave it out of his free will just because she needed it. Even if she told her about her quirk, Izuku told her that helping her was his priority, and not helping her would have been a betrayal for what he stood for. She was moved by his actions more than his words, and up to this day, Izuku had been proving his commitment to help her with his actions on a daily basis. "There is something that I wish to talk about with you, but only if you want to," Izuku said after he had finished explaining those things to her. "Sure, what is it?" Himiko asked, curious enough about what Izuku wanted to talk with him. "This conversation needs to be in private. The topic is sensible enough, and I prefer to keep it between us. And before you ask, I do have Ingenium's permission to talk with you alone, but only if you want to have this particular talk with me," Izuku said. "I see, but what is so important that you need to have that conversation in private?" Himiko said, more curious than before. "It is about giving you a more effective help so you can control your quirk urges better. There are things that we can try to do for you, but you have to not only know about them beforehand, but also give consent before anything can be done," Izuku said. He was aware that his words could be interpreted the wrong way, and considering how her face showed a more cautious expression, then Izuku knew that Himiko was a little on guard now. But he couldn't blame her for getting so defensive now. Don't worry. Is nothing invasive or related to experimentation or any kind of illegal treatment. It's just to find supplementary ways to help you to keep up with your quirk nutritional needs," Izuku said, and he saw how her expression relaxed. "So, that is what it is. I'm feeling that I am doing very well with how things are going now, so I don't think that I need more help." Himiko said, still a little defensive as her experience on the streets showed her that those kinds of dealings were always too good to be true. But then she saw that Izuku wasn't disappointed in her, and just smiled at her words. I'm glad to hear it. So, if this is how you feel at the moment, then forget that I say anything. You are the one who knows yourself the best, and if you think that you are doing fine now, then I will respect your decision. But if you think that you want to have this conversation in the future, then please talk to Ingenium or me. Izuku said with a smile on his face, and decided to drop the issue as Himiko wasn't interested in his help. Thank you, Himiko said, surprised over the fact that Izuku acted like that. After she rejected his offer, maybe that meant that Izuku's intentions were genuine, and he decided to drop his offer at the moment, because she told her that she was fine. No problem. Anything for a friend, Izuku said in a relaxed way. Himiko was moved in a way when Izuku called her a friend. That was in a way a taste of what a normal life was, and now she was able to experience those small details that made an easier life that appealing to her without feeling that they were out of her reach. Thank you for everything, Himiko said. Izuku simply smiled at her, and then she told her about what he was doing at the moment in school, and then she heard that Izuku was going to be dedicated almost a whole week of exams in 2 different places. 5 days in UA to fulfill his responsibilities as a general course student there, and 1 in another hero school to become a hero on his own terms. Even if Himiko was not that thrilled about the heroes, she was more or less able to figure out in a way from what Ingenium told her about how heroes spend their formative years in school, that what Izuku was doing put him in a way on a disadvantageous position, even if the idea of being a hero so early was that appealing. The hero schools not only serve to educate heroes, but also help them to create contact with other heroes to build their own contacts and connections in the industry when they have fully graduated. His decision to do that exam meant that Izuku would lack a lot of those connections and contacts in the industry at the beginning of his career if he passed that test. But something tells her that Izuku would be one of the few persons in the world that could actually become a hero and thrive despite that initial setback, because Izuku give off that air of sheer determination that makes her think that Izuku won't stop until he's success no matter what. So while she listened to Izuku with some admiration, she asked herself how things could have gone for her in her childhood if her environment had been kinder to her in a way that mattered to her, and she also was able to meet people who could have reached to her in the same way that Izuku had. Would she have snapped like she did when she attacked Saito because her quirk made her lose it in the worst way possible, or would she have managed to keep her urges in check as she had access to things that would have made those urges under control without denying that part of herself? She sadly didn't have the answer to those questions in her mind, and, in a way, felt indifferent to how things ended up as the rejection of her parents to who she was and how she was forced to act normal for the sake of others at the cost of her own comfort didn't make her look back to those times fondly, even when she asked herself if things could have gone better. The only thing that she could do now was to move forward and try to live her life the best way she could. Maybe that wouldn't make her atone for her crime, but she was going to do it anyway for herself. Are you ready for this, Izuku? Inko Midoriya said. The week of truth was at hand, and she wanted to cheer Izuku on before he walked away to the first day of the 5-day marathon of exams that Izuku would face today. Yeah, I'm as ready as I can ever be, Izuku said. He had a lot on his mind, like the whole AFO business and how Himiko had refused his discreet offer for help. Do not get Izuku wrong. He was happy for Himiko and considered that if she wanted to deal with this in her own way, then she had the right to it. Izuku ended up discussing with both Sir Nighteye and Ingenium that day about the moral quandary about what his quirk manipulation could do to people and how morally correct it was from a heroic standpoint to sabotage a quirk person to the point of disabling for good. And while Sir Nighteye was that willing to consider that sometimes disabling a quirk was the only solution if that quirk caused more damage to the user than to the others, Izuku ended up coming with a more acceptable compromise too. What his goal to be a hero was that at least both heroes were able to consider a valid and more hero-friendly way to deal with the issue. That meant that destroying someone's quirk factors until the quirk was useless as a last resort tactic or one reserved for the nastiest villains, while modifying the inner mechanism of someone's quirk was something that Izuku would only do under the affected party request or if the situation was dire enough for him to step up. So Himiko's negative to his offer meant that Izuku would respect her wishes and move on with his life. The other issue was that he revealed to his mom what All Might and Sir Nighteye revealed to him about AFO, and after his mom suffered a slight panic attack and Izuku calmed her down, they moved on to prepare an emergency plan, just in case the worst happened. He and his mother got the paperwork ready to request 2 passports, and thanks to their relation to the WHA, thanks to his dad's position on the WHA as a pseudo-ambassador of Japan on American soil, then they both were allowed to get a diplomatic passport in quite the short time notice. Those kinds of passports were reserved in Japan for members of the still existing imperial family, Japanese diplomats and their family members, high-level government officials, and high-profile heroes like All Might. Said passport gave the recipient the greatest degree of immunity from border control inspections around the world, and since both Izuku and his mom got theirs thanks to their connection to the WHA, then their passport was expedited to them from the WHA themselves, and not even the Japanese government or the HPSC had permission to stop them if they wanted to go if things got that badly. That made Izuku get rid of the notebooks that he had written as a child alongside the one for him, just in case, so nobody could use them as inculpatory evidence or something like that after a near Olympic level of mental gymnastics to try to paint him or his mom as villains in the making. Because Izuku knew that trusting the HPSC to act as the supposed guardians of what was meant to be heroic and righteous when they were those that corrupted the meaning of heroism to the point that people like Bakugo or that gray-haired boy from another hero school to have a chance to be heroes when those two showed that they were unheroic in their actions and motivations was a fool's errand. The incident that was caused by Bakugo and one of those students who came from Isamu Academy High School during lunch hour, in which that kid that was named Romero Fujimi and Bakugo ended up getting on each other's throats, and Bakugo snapped earlier than usual and decided to try to attack that guy with his quirk. And then with Romero responded by using his to try to zombify the other students around him while people was still eating, could have caused a massive amount of collateral damage. If it wasn't for All Might stepping up and incapacitating both kids before the situation could get even worse. But some students of UA ended either injured by Bakugo's explosions or turned temporary into zombies by Romero's quirk. That supposed joint training exercise was canceled, and the students of Isamu were politely but forcefully told to leave UA after what Romero did. Izuku didn't know what happened to that Romero guy or the other kids of Isamu after that shameful display of Romero, and how their future prospect would be affected, but it was clear that Bakugo's antics and lack of development on an emotional level weren't doing him any favors. And while Izuku wasn't surprised over the fact that Niza didn't kick him out of the hero course already, Izuku was at this point sure that Bakugo had ran of chances to shape up and get his shit together, and the next big mess could end with him being kicked out of UA for good. Izuku refused to show pity to someone who enjoyed making him miserable since they were kids, and now was getting his comeuppance because now that protection and privilege that the flashiness of his quirk afforded to him had run out. It was telling for Izuku that he remembered more about the times that Bakugo bullied and belittled him than the 1 or 2 times that they were on friendly terms as kids, and that happened only because their quirks hadn't manifested yet. Not even the hatred that Izuku felt for Bakugo now was able to blind him to the sad truth that Bakugo was a victim in a way of society's biases and lack of interest in the people who were meant to discipline him to get that job done that turned someone that could have been a normal member of society into that raging narcissist that believed that he was the next All Might in the making and treated people like they were worthless in comparison to him, when it was his attitude that made him worthless as a hero and a person. Now that Izuku had the time to vent his suppressed anger and managed to find an environment that allowed him to grow as a person without forcing him to be the one to suffer for the sake of the growth of others, Izuku was able to rationalize his negative emotions for Bakugo. And even if Izuku knew that the best way to give Bakugo the middle finger was to just be indifferent to him, now over allowing himself to let his anger over what he did to him to still lay in his heart, the scars were too deep, and he was too personally and emotionally affected to do what he knew that was the correct choice on the subject. Maybe one day Izuku would be able to disregard Bakugo's existence and give to him the cold indifference that he deserved, but would take a lot of time by the looks of it. The last day of the exams for Izuku came, and while he was talking to Kanoko about that last test that she was going to take tomorrow, and how she was still worried about it. I get you. You people are going to face the teachers, and even if they pull their punches and take it easy for you, you are still going against heroes who had experience on the field, even if the fight is 2 against 1 in your people's favor. Izuku said, trying his best to cheer her up. Yeah, at least your notes and tips to improve were quite helpful. Some of us improved in the way how we use our quirks thanks to those observations of yours. Kanoko said. Not all her classmates decided to take Izuku's offer to have a quick analysis of their quirks, mainly Monoma and the few that were a little too prideful. But those that took that offer and gave Izuku a notebook to work with ended up finding that Izuku had a level of insight about their quirks that almost made them think that he knew about them like they were his own quirk. He gave them examples of exercises to do with their quirks to strengthen them properly, and the thing was that Izuku's examples did work like a charm. From Setsuna Tokage managing to reassemble her body and split herself into pieces at a faster rate than at the beginning of the year, to the discovery that Kanoko ended doing about the fact that she could increase the effectiveness of the properties of the mushrooms that she created, so she could force-feed mushrooms that could send people to sleep or force them to get on a mushroom-induced high. Some of those of Class 1B who took Izuku's offer did found out that their quirks still had room to grow and develop their powers, while others found out methods to increase the effectiveness of the way that they used their powers. Izuku did told them that he didn't made any promises about him finding out any hidden potential in them, but what he gave them helped them to improve. Glad that the quick quirk counseling that I did for you people was helpful. I do want to do that as a job in a way in the future, so to see that it worked so well, Izuku said. Yeah, some of us even managed to create our super moves thanks to what you wrote in those notebooks. Kanoko said. I'm really happy to hear that. But the whole concept of a super move now to me became something ridiculous, to be honest with you. Don't get me wrong, I get the whole concept, but the whole super move thing makes me think about a fighting video game. I mean, in real life, unless you have a quirk that works like that, the heroes aren't tied up to a super move gauge that limits the usage of their techniques. You don't need to get the shit kicked out of you to use your mushroom effectively and to pull impressive things on a fight. I know that the whole naming it super move is a marketing thing, but I prefer the alternative name to them. You have to agree with me that calling them signature moves is better than super moves. Izuku said. You do have a point there, Kanoko said. Both continued their conversation while reaching a more mundane topic, but certain people did hear about the whole deal about Izuku writing notebooks for some students of Class 1B and how those notes helped to improve their quirks. That made both Nizu and Vlad King realize that the one responsible for the quick development and progress of some of the students of Class 1B with their quirks was Izuku, and that made that certain student of 1A whose quirk allowed her to hear things better from a distance to realize that they had discriminated some to the point of wanting to quit heroics that had the potential to help them improve, and it was that lack of decency and humanity that had deprived almost all of them of what could have being their only source of help to improve, as now it was clear to everyone in Class 1A that if you weren't Shinso Hitoshi, then you weren't going to get any kind of help from Eraserhead in any way, shape, or form, as the man couldn't be bothered to stay awake in class unless he had something to inform them. If only they knew about that detail about Izuku and treated him with some respect before the USJ incident, then maybe they would be doing better now. In a normal situation, and if UA was a normal school, then Izuku would have had a lot of trouble taking the train to the Hyogo Prefecture to do that exam, as today was still a school day. But since UA did things on their own way, the Izuku had this day free of class as the whole faculty decided to dedicate the Saturday to do the practical part of the exams for the hero student, so that left the students of the other courses with 1 day free of going into UA. They managed it by cramming that 6th day for the exams of that week into the 5th day, and then letting them to go to class the next day to let them rest and to have the faculty free so they could focus only in the hero course. Izuku would admit that he was a little out of his element when he stepped out of the train and was now at the main train station in Kobe City. Izuku was used to Hosa City, and now that he was in a new city, then he was in new territory. And even if he looked at a map in his phone or asked people, that sense of being out of place was still there. But Izuku's heroic acquaintances pitched in, and then he saw that Sir Nighteye was waiting for him. I know that you are doing this out of a sense of obligation, but I appreciate the gesture, Izuku said. Both the hero and Izuku got in a private car, and while Sir Nighteye drove the car, both had a small conversation about the recent events after the revelation of Izuku's ancestry. I take that you warned your mother about AFO's existence, Sir Nighteye said. Izuku nodded his head. Yeah, The whole thing, and how both she and I could be potential targets of that villain just because we are related to him, meant that some measures had to be taken. Don't get me wrong, I trust All Might in your words about how you two would help us to move out of Japan if things got out of hand. But after that talk with my mom, both of us made our own preparations just in case. Maybe they are unneeded in the end, but I would rather take that time making those preparations, even if they're useless in the end, than to be in need of what we managed to get and not have those passports at hand, because I considered that your help was enough. Izuku said. I see. I can't say that I disagree with that logic, but why passports? Sir Nighteye said, admitting that the idea of Izuku to have a passport already at hand was a time-saver maneuver in part, but he was just curious about what he managed to archive. Well, because passports are needed to travel outside the country. And because thanks to my dad's position in the WHA, both my mother and I were entitled to possess a diplomatic passport expedited from the WHA itself. Izuku said. The ride in the car was quite uneventful, and Izuku wanted to de-stress from the thoughts of the exam, even if that meant talking about the possibility of abandoning Japan. I see. Those offer the greatest degree of immunity from border control inspections and other issues related to traveling to other countries that are aligned to the WHA. All Might is one of those few heroes that has one of those passports, as the number of conditions for a hero to have that kind of protection from the WHA is too high. Giving that level of protection to the wrong hero could damage the WHA's reputation. Sir Nighteye said, a little surprised over the fact that Izuku managed to get one of those passports. But he remembered Izuku's connections with the Japanese representative of the WHA, and in a way, he considered that Izuku's decision to get those passports was an extra level of insurance for Izuku, and not a bad thing to have considering the circumstances. Yeah, maybe I'm being a little paranoid, but as I said, I prefer to waste time taking those precautions to not need them in the end, to not concern myself with those things and then lament if things go bad when I had the time to do something about it. Izuku said, that is quite thoughtful on your part, but sometimes, not even if you prepare for the worst, you would be able to solve the situation, as things out of control could ruin your plans. Sir Nighteye said, I know, but something that I promised to myself after what happened to Bakugo in that street the past year was that I would at least be prepared to do something to not look like a sitting duck and look pretty as the situation could get worse. Those three heroes waited for someone more suited to save the day, while two of them had no excuse to be that useless. That angered me, to the point that I promised myself that I would never be that kind of hero. A hero has to be able to look for solutions all the time, and just throwing your hands in the air and giving up an end without fully trying was unacceptable. Izuku admitted. Yeah, I can see that. Kamui Woods was the only one in that situation who had a real excuse to not intervene as his quirk, and that fire didn't mix that well at all. Sir Nighteye said. Both reached Shiketsu High School, and Sir Nighteye let Izuku get out of the car near the school. As I said before, thanks for the ride. Izuku said, I have my own business to attend to in the area, so I decided to help you at Ingenium's request. But I want you to learn something about this situation that would help you in the future if you wish to pursue heroics on your own terms. The hero said. Izuku was quite sure of what Sir Nighteye was talking about, was that since he was going to be a hero who worked on his own, without an agency in his name or people to be his sidekicks, then Izuku was going to put that extra effort into building his own connections with heroes around the country to cover his bases and to deal with any issue in a place that wasn't his area of influence. Yeah, that it pays to be social with the heroes even if I'm going to not focus on the marketing game. So I could have their help in case I need their help to do something in their territories, even more if I'm still lacking any knowledge about the cities in which they work in, Izuku said. Good. There are few heroes that roam around the country doing hero work, and the most popular is a new upcoming heroine with an attitude called Mirko. She is on the hunt for villains to fight, but she has enough sense to interact with the local heroes of the area, even if she is a lone wolf who fights on her own and never team-ups with others. Some of those local heroes either offered her a place to stay in their agencies or directed her to places where she could rest for the night for an affordable price if she refused to stay in those agencies. The hero said, I will take that under advisement, but before thinking about that, I first need to pass this exam to become a hero. Then I will move to the next step of my plan. Izuku said. Sir Nighteye just nodded at his words and said some parting words before he decided to focus on his task that brought him to Kobe. Those bullets that could temporarily erase quirks appeared in the area, and he wanted to see what he could find about them. I wish you luck, Midoriya. In case you need me to take you back to the station, just give me a call, and I will see what I can do. Izuku heard those words, and then he thanked the hero for his help. He saw how his car disappeared in the distance, and then he stepped forward to enter Shiketsu High School. Izuku wasn't sure if he would succeed or fail, but he had to try it if he wanted to be a hero. Izuku just hoped that things would be less hectic than the entrance exam in UA. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Deku Had Blood Manipulation Quirk? We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Judas Magnus 1994 for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on archiveofourown.org for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.